Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Hersey. Happy Thursday to each of you, and on behalf of FATA, welcome to today's webinar titled Understanding Adolescent Substance Use, a Trauma-Informed Approach to Prevention. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration between the Florida Department of Children and Families and FATA. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and are only able to view your name. Your webcam and microphone have been disabled. If you have questions, please send them to all panelists by using the chat panel. The button to open the panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. We will address questions as time permits. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio at any time during today's presentation, there are a few options to try using the Communicate menu. For computer audio, click on the Communicate menu, then click the Audio Connection panel. Click Disconnect, click the Communicate menu and Audio Connection button again, then click Call in using a computer and follow the instructions. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try using the I will call in option under the Communicate menu. The access code and event password will be posted in the chat panel momentarily. You must be connected to the audio of this presentation and view it on screen to receive a statement of credit. We are unable to verify attendance if you are not connected to WebEx via a computer or mobile app. Therefore, phone call only attendees are not eligible for a statement of credit or CEUs. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. FATA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through FATA. A statement of credit and CEUs for up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar. CEUs are available for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. Completing the evaluation is necessary to receive CE credits or to access your statement of credit. Please note that the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. At the end of today's webinar, you will have 3 opportunities to complete the evaluation: a link posted in the chat, a follow-up email from WebEx, and an automatic web browser pop-up when the webinar ends. To complete the evaluation, you will first need to register or sign into your account. Please ensure your name and email address match the name and email you used when you registered for today's webinar. Information you provide FATA as part of registering remains confidential. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license number for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your license number or certification number when you register with our site. If you need assistance with account registration, login information, or accessing the evaluation, fill out a contact form on our website or email training@floridabha.org before March 4th, 2025. Please note that WebEx monitors the arrival and departure times of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a statement of credit if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CE credit. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes in the professional development section of your FATA account. For licensed practitioners, CEUs will be reported to CE Broker within the same time frame. This presentation is intended solely for educational purposes. The views, opinions, information, and content expressed in the presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Children and Families, the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, or the Florida Behavioral Health Association. Attendees should note that sessions are recorded and published in various media. Our presenter today is Shantae L. Shantae, recently inducted into the 2024 Marquise Who's Who of America and honored as a featured healthcare provider, brings nearly 19 years of experience empowering vulnerable youth and families in medical, academic, residential, and child welfare settings. A passionate advocate for post traumatic resiliency through trauma informed care, she is a licensed clinical social worker, certified trauma sensitive yoga facilitator, and certified trauma family professional. Shantae serves as the co-founder and CEO of Lotus Trauma Care, a leading trauma provider on Chicago's South Side. In addition to her leadership role, Shantae has served as an adjunct lecturer and field consultant at the University of Chicago's Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from Loyola University Chicago, with a focus on child and adolescent development, and her master's in social service administration from the University of Chicago, specializing in the treatment of complex trauma. And now I would like to welcome our presenter, Shantae L. Shantae, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you everybody for being here. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me well, with the exception of those who I see are having some challenges. Unfortunately, hopefully those will be resolved pretty soon. I get very passionate, so if I begin speaking too quickly, please drop in the chat box for me to slow down, and I will make sure that that happens. So I'm really excited to be here with you all, but before we get started, I'm going to ask that you drop what you are doing, the role that you have, as well as the setting that you're in into the chat box. This will assist me in making sure that as we're talking about these things, we can make sure that you all walk away with some practical strategies to apply to your particular setting, and that the information that is presented to you is also relevant to where you are working at. So we have therapy, we have a lot of therapists of substance abuse prevention, education, supervisors, case management, school, working in schools, K through 12. Perfect, perfect. So we have a wide range of people here, and so a wealth of knowledge in the room. Nursing student, outpatient work, prevention specialist, community liaison, attorney, ad litem. Okay, perfect. So this is wonderful. So I'm really, really excited. So thank you all across your various roles for taking the time out to have a better understanding of adolescent substance use, and more specifically a trauma-informed approach to prevention, especially as we think about the context that we're navigating now. I'm seeing a lot of youth being extremely, extremely anxious and overwhelmed by what it is that they're seeing happening in the world, in addition to those developmental tasks. So our time today will include understanding the connection between trauma or overwhelming stress and substance use in adolescence. We'll explore evidence-based prevention approaches, looking at the different levels and different ways we can begin to prevent the adolescent from using substances based on the risk and protective factors that have been found in prevention research. And we'll learn some practical trauma-informed strategies to support adolescents in the process of building on those protective factors to help mitigate the risk factors that we found. So when we think about adolescent substance use, one of the things that's important is that we understand that most youth actually make really good decisions for their health. And over 70% of youth do not use alcohol, and nearly 60% do not use marijuana. Over 80% of high schoolers do not binge drink, and over 90% do not currently misuse opiates. And the age of initiation of use and the frequency of use are better determinants of use than the use disorder than the duration of use. So essentially, when they start using and how often they are using is a much better factor and variable than how long they have been using. And in 2019, current alcohol use, lifetime cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, and injection drug use actually decreased between the last 10 years of 2009 and 2019. So when we think about these statistics, we see that things are moving in the right direction. Our prevention efforts are working. Our prevention efforts are beginning to see some shifts in what we want to see. And you'll notice that when I'm talking about what we're seeing with our youth, I'm looking at how the majority of the youth are acting and behaving, as opposed to the 30% that may be using alcohol, right? And we'll talk more about why that is and how we have presented these things in a moment. So when we're thinking about adolescent development, adolescence is a very, very, very interesting stage of development. I'm sure we all can remember being teens at some point and finding ourselves feeling like we were misunderstood or feeling as though we were an adult and couldn't be told anything after we hit the age of 18. And then later on in actual adulthood, realizing we actually knew nothing, right? But it's a very delicate stage in which we want to be very mindful about how we are addressing and engaging with the youth, and more importantly, understand what are realistic expectations of the youth that we're engaging, right? Especially given that we are working across different fields, working across different roles. And so we want to ground ourselves in understanding what is teenhood all about, right? What's happening in their brain development? What is occurring for them? So this is a critical time where they are establishing their identity outside of their family, as well as establishing their peer relationships. So they're figuring out, where do I fit in? What do I like? Who am I? Social connections with their peers, their families, and mentors help teens develop social skills, autonomy, and a sense of belonging. The sense of belonging is important for any human, but especially during our adolescent stages. Adolescents are also more likely to seek independence and may challenge authority as a part of identity formation. And so when we talk about these different practical strategies later on, we're going to talk about how do we actually engage teens so that they're actually receptive to what it is that we're saying to them, and that they feel seen so that they are actually listening to us and engaging in the content that we're asking them to engage in, rather that be a program that we want them to engage in, an activity we want them to engage in, something that's being court ordered, etc. So when we look at social development and trauma, we're going to look at different domains of development, and we're going to look at how trauma impacts the development in adolescence, as well as how substance use is impacting the developmental stage. So we're looking at social development first, where trauma or overwhelming stress, right? So anytime a child or any human, but in this case, a teenager is experiencing overwhelming stress, that might be from social media, that might be from the engagement and juggling their schedules with extracurriculars and AP classes, or just classwork in general. That may be dealing with the challenges of navigating peer conflict and peer relationships. It may be a combination of these things. It could even be things happening at home that could be contributing to their overwhelming stress, because overwhelming stress or trauma is very subjective, but it can disrupt their social development because it can have an impact on their ability to trust, right? An impact on their ability to connect with other people and feel safe doing so, and ultimately their ability to form healthy relationships, which is very important because, as we mentioned a moment ago, social development, identity, and relationships are significant challenges or tasks that the youth are working on developing at this time, so they can go on and have a contribution to humanity and their communities. Teens are also experiencing who experience trauma may isolate themselves. They may become hypervigilant or very, very aware of tones of voice, of changes in people's body language, or the way that they are engaging with them. And they're also more likely to engage in unhealthy peer groups as a coping mechanism. This may be due to bonding around the challenges they're experiencing, or maybe this may be due to some of the activities that these peer groups may be included in. When we think about substance use and social development, substance use can amplify social challenges by increasing their risk of association with high-risk peer groups, as well as contributing to additional isolation, right? Which in isolation more specifically from positive social influences. And so we see that substance use and trauma, when they're both present, it can kind of exacerbate some of the challenges and tasks that you are experiencing in the first place. It can also impair their decision making in social contexts, where maybe they may find themselves behaving or acting in certain ways that their peers are encouraging to act, that can lead to conflict with family or other peers. Their emotional development is also extremely important. During the time of adolescence, hormones are going wild, and their amygdala, the limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the thalamus is beginning to work with the prefrontal cortex, where we are expecting youth to have inhibition. We're expecting them to have impulse control, to be able to regulate, to communicate respectfully, to manage all of these different tasks that they have going on. And the emotional development is going to have a significant impact on a child's ability to access that prefrontal cortex and those functioning levels. And when we're experiencing emotional development, they have an heightened emotional reactivity due to things because of hormones, especially in the developmental stages that they're experiencing. It can also have a significant component where when they are learning how to recognize what they are feeling, why they're feeling it, and then calm themselves down, this leads to their ability to have access to their prefrontal cortex. So their emotional development becomes very, very important, because if a youth is not able to have emotional literacy and emotional regulation capacities, they become more susceptible to experiencing substance use and some other challenges. Okay, so let's see here. Yes, I can. Can you all see me now? Okay. Make sure everyone's able to see me. Okay, so this is where our emotional development is very important. And this emotional development is also going to be the reason why we may find youth having challenges with being like snappy or being short with us, maybe being intimidating, even sometimes depending on the youth, right? This is why it's happening. The hormonal changes, and their brain is literally beginning to make connections between their executive functioning and their emotional regulation capacity. So it's almost like another toddlerhood that is happening again. And when we think about emotional development and trauma, trauma increases emotional dysregulation, because what it does is it causes that, if you think about the limbic system as an alarm system that is constantly scanning the environment for safety threats and to make sure that the youth is safe, it can be activated by many things. It can be activated by a sense of smell. It can be activated by a facial expression, a tone of voice, something in the setting, such as a color or a furniture piece, just about anything, because of the way our brain processes overwhelming stress. So trauma will make it even more difficult for you to make sense of what it is that they're feeling and why they're feeling it, especially because an emotion such as disappointment, for instance, or rejection that may happen within their peer group or at school with their teachers or with their coaches may be exacerbated by their experiences of overwhelming stress, which will lead to heightened anxiety, depression, and mood instability, which can make them more susceptible to actually using substance use. Adolescents are also more likely to develop maladaptive coping mechanisms because of the overwhelming emotions. So, an attempt to make sense of and to numb and to manage some of those overwhelming emotions, they may find themselves avoiding them, numbing them, or even harming themselves using substances. So when we look at substance use and emotional development, this substance use causes a further disruption to emotional development because it impairs the brain's natural reward system, which alters the mood regulation. So what ends up happening is we all know that adolescence is a very, very important brain developmental period, right? And so during that time, when a child is engaging in a behavior that they find to be rewarding or excited, dopamine is fired off. And dopamine is the hormone in the brain that is responsible for saying, hey, do this again. We want this again, right? And so when a youth, and this is why they are such seekers of things that are fun and adventurous, right? But when this is happening, it makes it so that a youth will then have a lot of dopamine going on. And if they're using substances very frequently, right, and for a long frequency of very frequently and for a long period of time, what happens is the brain will begin to produce dopamine less in an attempt to calibrate the hormone production, making it very difficult and causing and contributing to some of that dependency and some of those withdrawal symptoms that we see when a youth may begin stop using. Adolescents may use substances to help self-medicate their emotional pain, which again just creates that cycle of dependency, worsening their emotional instability. Just checking the chat box here. So we think about their cognitive development, which is their ability to think clearly, their ability to make sense of what it is that they want, to have inhibition, to have critical thinking skills. This is when they have a much better or increased capacity for abstract thinking, problem solving, and taking perspectives outside of their own, right? And so as they are beginning to learn that, this prefrontal cortex is developing, but it's developing in tandem with that emotional center of the limbic system. And so executive functioning is actually maturing during this age, but it's still underdeveloped in comparison to adults, which is why sometimes they may do things that are a bit impulsively. And we're like, you didn't think about that. But no, they honestly didn't think about that because they don't have the capacity at times to take the perspective of things that we as adults can take the perspective of because of experience and because of other things. And I think another key point and caveat here with cognitive development is, and I'm seeing this a lot with teenagers and young adults, is that adults sometimes will attempt to teach children about all these different things that are happening in the world, right? Like, oh, you have bills to pay for and you have to make sure that you get a good life, but it can contribute to anxiety, right? Which then has an impact on their, not only their cognitive development, where there's intrusive thoughts and overwhelming thoughts, but also their emotional development. So it's very important that we're mindful of how we're communicating with them so that we are doing so in a way that reinforces it or increases the behavior that we want to see. So the cognitive development in trauma impacts their cognitive development by altering brain structures such as the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that is required or responsible for learning, right? Our short-term and long-term memory, as well as the prefrontal cortex. And what happens is when we are experiencing overwhelming stress, the hippocampus will often be bypass over to another part of the brain that's responsible for just activating what's called a fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response to help mitigate the perceived threat. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain and the front of our foreheads where we are expecting teenagers to have the memory, attention, inhibition, decision-making skills. And so when we have overwhelming stress, because of the redirection of energy to that limbic system and reinforcement of those brain structures, it can create a challenge with memory, attention, decision making, as well as academic performance. Because if they're unable to retain information because their brain is constantly being activated by potential threats, it makes it very difficult for the youth to have retention or to their brain to essentially feel that the content in the academic performance arena is necessary to be imprinted into our brain, right? Because the hippocampus, again, is being bypassed, and instead it becomes something called, things become more of a somatic memory. Chronic stress may also delay or regress cognitive processes and abilities. So sometimes there might be like confusion, mind going blank. Sometimes we might see the youth disassociating or looking off into space or not being able to find their words or completely articulate themselves. And so what we're seeing is that when you think about all of the things that are just normally happening in adolescent development, they are exacerbated by chronic stress and substance use. So if we look at substance use and cognitive development specifically, we're seeing that substance use during teenage years affects the ability for the brain to develop, interfering with neuroplasticity and executive functioning. And I'm kind of, constantly kind of mention that, but the neuroplasticity component of it is that our brain is all about calibration and being very, very quick and using something called heuristics to make sure that we can do things quickly, especially when it comes to experiencing things that require little thought or that's life and death. And so when we're thinking about substance use and that dopamine reward center, right, and how the substances might be impacting the neurotransmitters and the production of those neurotransmitters, the brain is trying to calibrate to overcompensate for what the flood of hormones or lack thereof may be happening. So it may overproduce things in attempts to balance things out, or it may underproduce things in attempt to balance things out, depending on the drug that the youth is using. And long-term use can lead to deficits in their memory, their attention, and their impulse control, which will ultimately impact their academic and career potential. How does, Linda, great question. How does what's the cognitive development or substance use? Can you be a little more clear? How does cognitive development impact the child with autism and trauma? So autism, I'm not an expert in autism by any means, so I just want to put that disclaimer out there, right? But autism and trauma often overlap with one another. And so we can see that there's a exacerbation of some of the symptoms in autism when trauma is impacted. And so the challenges that a youth is experiencing may also be exacerbated, right? So they may have even more challenges with reading social cues. They may have additional challenges with problem solving and being able to have deductive reasoning, or being able to focus and concentrate and not be distractible. So essentially the substance use in the trauma is exacerbating some of those autistic symptoms. Does that make sense? Okay.
And Elle, there was another question just above it. Do you support the use of MAT for adolescents dealing with substance use? In what situations do you think it is a good solution, and when is it not?
MAT, which acronym is it? There are so many acronyms. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Penny, what are you referring to when you say MAT? Pamela, I would definitely try to slow down a little more. Medically assisted treatment. I don't know enough about it to make an opinion on it. And I think there are always going to be kind of like be nuances, but I don't want to make an opinion on it. I would need to do some additional research to give an informed opinion. But that's a really great question. So we're going to watch a brief video about brain development before we go into looking at the differences between normal experimentation versus the trauma-based use.
As teens, people are always telling us what we can't do. Do you ever wonder why that is? Why can't I stay up late? What could happen if I just play for 15 more minutes? Who cares if I smoke a joint every now and then? Let's face it, adults may mean well, but they can't really explain why they won't let us do this stuff. The thing is, there's actually a really cool explanation, and it has to do with our brains. From the outside, the brain of a newborn looks just like a smaller version of an adult brain, but there's a big difference. There's a ton of stuff that still needs to be programmed into a young person's brain. That's where our life experiences come in. How we interact with what's around us shapes our brains until we're in our mid-20s. We can't feel our brains changing, but they are super busy building circuits and programming. So how does this happen? Every little thing that happens to us can change our brain in huge ways. At short distances, our experiences can make or break connections between brain cells. By guiding the creation of circuits, experiences shape our perceptions, memories, and everything that makes us unique. But they also affect our brain across longer distances. This involves the construction of thick bundles of fibers that connect different brain regions. By creating this complex network, experiences help increase the brain's bandwidth, allowing it to work better and better. But you gotta keep in mind, these short and long-range connections are influenced by everything we do and everything that happens to us. But this is awesome news. It means we are the programmers of our brains. Every decision, good or bad, influences how our brain develops. Let's talk about taking drugs. For example, pretend this is the keyboard you are using to program your brain. Using drugs just for fun or to get high would be like scrambling the letters on the keyboard. Now, if you scramble the letters on the keyboard after the program is written, that can lead to temporary errors or make it hard for the program to run for a while. But if you scramble the letters while the program is being written, the program can incorporate catastrophic, long-lasting glitches. This is why teens are better off without drugs. We are in the middle of coding our brains, and drugs can cause real problems that can last a long time. And yet, drugs are just one of the many possible ways of scrambling our keyboards. For example, not enough sleep, lack of exercise, or eating too much junk food can also harm our brain programs. So yeah, I get it. It's annoying to be told what we can and can't do, but I would rather focus on my ability to shape my brain through smarter decisions. It turns out we have far more control than we thought. We can use this information to choose our own paths and give ourselves the best possible futures.
Awesome sauce. So we're seeing that what we are doing here when we think about brain development and the impact of substance use and overwhelming stress and even our interactions that we're having with the youth that across our different roles can be a brain hack, right? So we can use this brain science that we understand to help guide the youth in having healthy healthy executive functioning, healthy emotional regulation, healthy communication, healthy regulation of their emotions, right? And I want to come back to Penny's question because I couldn't help but do a little bit of exploration around MAT. But what we're looking at when we think about, I think this is a simple caveat we want to think about with MAT, with adolescent development, is how significantly neuroplastic their brains are and how the use of any like substances or any of the substances used in MAT can create a dependency, right? So anything that happens over and over and over and over again in the brain experiences something called myelination, which is when that neural pathway is being insulated and becomes quicker and easier to do or use. And that's why we can like drive home, for instance, without really thinking about like, oh, how did I get home? Right. And so there's not very much research that is saying that it's effective, but they are asking when we think about using it with youth, you want to consider some of the things such as the exhaustion of other strategies like behavioral strategies and addressing some of those risk and protective factors. So there's definitely a nuanced aspect of things. So I hope that helps a little. So let's look at this trauma-based use versus experimentation, right? So we're finding that there are several categories that will tell us whether or not a youth might experience some typical experimentation versus trauma-related substance use, right? And when it's more trauma-related substance use, this gives us just an understanding that we want to get them some additional support around addressing the risk factors that we'll see in just a moment, because those risk factors that we'll see in a moment are also similar risk factors to experiencing a lot of challenges that can come from trauma. So when we think about motivation for use, we want to find out and understand, is the youth using because they are curious about what that high feels like? Are they using because, oh, well, my friend is just happening at the party? Or is there a social acceptance like, hey, I needed to, or I would have been considered a lame or maybe considered like not cool? That would be some typical experimentation, right? Whereas with trauma-related substance use is typically being used because it's a coping mechanism to numb, right? Or to manage distressing trauma symptoms or escape negative emotions. So maybe they're feeling really angry and they're smoking or they're drinking to help calm down that anger and to help numb that anger. Other times they may be using substances to kind of help to give themselves to feel something again, because maybe they're feeling very depressed and out of touch with the world, and they might be using in order to kind of have like a stimulant, if you will, to kind of have more of a connection and a feeling of a being alive. Their frequency and pattern is also going to be something that's important for us to consider, such as, is it more occasional and short term, right? When we're thinking about typical experimentation, is typically a decline that generally happens with maturity or shifting priorities. So this might look like, during the winter break, there was a lot of drinking that was going on, but once school picked back up and they got involved in the extracurriculars, they began focused on their extracurriculars and getting their homework done, and the drinking kind of began to subside. So that might be like an example of what typical experimentation might look like. Whereas with trauma-related substance use, it's going to be an escalation over time, and the use is pretty frequent. So when we're seeing them use like on a daily basis, for instance, maybe they're using before and after school, maybe they're even leaving school or trying to smoke in the bathroom, especially now that there are vape pens and things that ways that they can inconspicuously use, we may find that they may be using throughout the day to help kind of navigate different challenges that they're experiencing. And then we have types of substances, right? Whereas with typical experimentation, there's typically, the alcohol or cannabis, and it's like, oh, I just only try this or only do this. Whereas with trauma-related substance use, there's usually a polysubstance use where they are more likely to try opioids, stimulants, or sedatives because of the impact that it can have in management of the overwhelming experiences that they're having. No. So yes, that's a great question, Thomas. No, I'm not saying that only people or youth who have trauma-related substance. Let me just tell everyone the question is, are you saying only trauma-related substance abuse often results in dependency? Teens who experiment often develop substance use disorders. Yes, for sure, right? Remembering that the most important piece about whether or not a substance use disorder is going to happen is if they are the age of initiation. The earlier, the more likely they may be in the frequency of the use, right? But what I'm saying is that for those who are recognizing, and maybe for GALs, for instance, who are making recommendations, or for therapists who are creating treatment plans, or for parents who are concerned, when we understand is it typical experimentation versus trauma-related experimentation, the recommendations may be a little bit different than it will be if the youth is just going through typical experimentation. Does that make sense, Thomas? So trauma, an overwhelming stress will definitely just require a little bit more support for the youth, right? To address the root trauma, the root of why they're trying to navigate and cope with and what they're coping with. So yes, it's not saying just because you have trauma definitely does not mean you're going to end up with a substance use disorder, or just because you tried substances would mean that you're going to end up with one, right? Which is why these assessment questions are so important. And then we have here, Linda says that we have an adolescent who is addicted to alcohol, and he has been for several years. What do you recommend for him? This is substance trauma related. Yes. So we definitely want to make sure that whatever treatment that he's engaged in is also trauma informed, meaning that they are helping him to recognize the physiological and cognitive and emotional cues that are telling him that he's overwhelmed, so that he's then able to begin utilizing healthy alternative coping skills. I also recommend building on his strengths, right? So if he is already engaged in like gaming or extracurricular activities, or he has other expressive outlets or skills such as drawing, we want to build on those to help with the regulation components, as opposed to trying to give all new skills. Also, and then we'll talk a little bit more as well as we're looking at some things, but with trauma, we want to make sure that we are also helping them to process and understand what are the triggers, so that they are able to address the root of the triggers in addition to the regulation, so that the trauma triggers are resolved, or at the very least the intensity is decreased, so that it's not so overwhelming that they feel they need an additive of some sort, in this case alcohol, in order to manage. Amy says, I know the statistics ended at 2019. Do you feel there are more trauma based due to anxiety, depression occurred in 2020 to today because of the pandemic? Certainly. Yes, yes, yes. The amount of stress that these babies are experiencing with the social media, and their exposure to all of the crazy world global events that are happening is one aspect of things. The lack of social engagement that they had, especially those youth who maybe started high school during the pandemic. There's the going back into the school system caused a lot and contributed to a lot of anxiety and overwhelm around how to keep up with all the changing schedules, how to keep up with the different teachers, how to keep up with the homework, while also navigating the social setting, right? And managing the conflicts and managing group text messages being sent out about this person and that person. So it's a very, very significant platform or context that our youth are coming up in today that we all maybe had no experience with. These are great questions. I'm all about questions, so keep them coming. So when we come back over to the difference between typical and trauma related, right, so that we can make sure that we are getting the child's needs met, we're thinking also about the impact of functioning, right? So when we're thinking about typical experimentation, there's generally a minimal impact on their academics, relationships, or daily life, right? So they're maybe less likely to meet criteria for the more moderate chronic substance use disorders. Whereas with trauma-related substance use, there's generally a higher impairment between school relationships and daily responsibilities. And so this is not because of the trauma in itself, but because trauma exacerbates a lot of those developmental tasks that they're navigating, as we talked about earlier on in the afternoon. We also have coping mechanisms where we have healthy regulation. Like, so with typical experimentation, they may also, enjoy journaling or listening to music or hanging out with their friends. So they have a repertoire of other ways that they can cope, maybe talking to a trusted adult or a coach, their parent, right? Whereas with trauma-related substance use, substances is usually their primary way of coping, right? So like, how do you deal with a stressful day? Might be a differential type of question you can ask a youth to kind of find out whether or not the use is associated and accompanied by the dysregulation and avoidance, right? And so the coping mechanisms, we want to learn more. So we're going to talk about open-ended questions, right? And so when we're thinking about these open-ended questions just a little bit later, we want to think about how we can begin to maybe explore what is this child's motivation for use? Why, how often are they using it, and when are they using, right? What types of substances are going on? So for instance, especially with the frequency and pattern, with the experimentation, oftentimes there are some rules around when they use, like, oh, I can only use after I do my homework, or I only use on the weekends, right? Or I only use when I don't have practice, right? So there's a lot more limitations and boundaries around use. You also want to consider about co-occurring symptoms. So with typical experimentation, there's typically just kind of navigating the typical developmental challenges of hormones and the waves of those, right? But there are no major health concerns. Whereas with trauma, we may see that the symptoms of trauma are also causing some additional symptoms that are overlapping with other mental health challenges, right? Such as hypervigilance or being very, very aware and keen to what's shifting. So I use an example of a young man I was working with. He had to be about 19 years old, and he had some moderate cocaine use and severe marijuana use. And in my office, I had my pen case on one side of the table. But for some reason, I'm like, oh, I switched it to the other side of the table. He came into the office and immediately recognized that I shifted the table, how the stuff on the table was positioned, right? That's an example of hypervigilance, like very, very keenly aware to the environment. And the reason why the brain is doing that is because it's attempting to make sure that they're safe, attempting to prevent their traumatic, overwhelming stress from happening again. Some other co-occurring symptoms that might appear is like disassociating. This is where they might say things like they don't feel like themselves, or that they can't remember what happened or what was going on. Their mind might be going blank, where they are kind of going to a whole nother place. The disassociation can also be them detaching from their emotions, right? Where it's like, oh, it is what it is. I don't care. It doesn't matter, right? Where it's just kind of like they're just completely detached from the situation and the emotion or the internal experience that they're having in an attempt to cope. Chronic irritability and intrusive memories are also some other trauma-related symptoms that may also be occurring, right? So this might be intrusive memories, could be nightmares. It could be, constantly hearing the words of their bullies in their heads over and over again. It could be, yeah, I'll just stop there. And then we have our developmental trajectory. All right, so with developmental trajectory, we're looking at typical experimentation. This is associated with exploration, right? When the experimentation is tending to actually decrease with time and maturity, because they are just, learning what they like, who they are, what they enjoy, rather than, oh, I don't like how this made me feel. I don't like how I lost control. So they're kind of just like learning and curious, the same way a toddler might be, touching all of these other things and a bit curious. Where we have trauma-related substance use as it relates to developmental trajectory is getting worse, right, without intervention. And there's a higher risk of developing the substance use disorder, right? And so I hope this makes sense to everyone. I want to pause and ask if there are any more questions. It was a lot of information. I'll give you all a moment to drop and type into the chat box. Okay. So youth prevention, right? The reason we're all here, we want to make sure our children, who are going to be the leaders of the world at some point, taking care of us at some point, and we want to make sure that they are able to have the skills and the things that they need in order to be successful adults, in order to regulate the chronic stress of adulthood, especially here in America. And so the 4 things we're looking at is making sure we're promoting healthy youth development, right? So we're helping them to regulate their emotions. We're helping them to be able to understand what they're feeling and why they're feeling beyond mad and happy, right? We're helping them to recognize what are some different ways that they can begin filling their cups up intellectually, emotionally, physically, as well as mentally. We're also helping them build social emotional skills. So are they able to have and navigate conflict in a healthy way? Are they able to assertively communicate and express themselves and their needs and their boundaries with their peers, right? Are they able to recognize how they're impacting other people and have impact and shift some of those things, being able to be accountable? We also want to help them with refusal skills. So these refusal skills look like, and so you might have a plan that you do with them, right? So for instance, it might be something like, okay, well, we're going to pretend like mom just texted you to get out of there, right? So some ways this might be an exit plan for a refusal skill, or other times there's like a statement or a phrase they might say about why they're not using, or what or how uncomfortable they are, right? Like, my mom will kill me if she smelled that on me, or my dad would kill me if he knew that that was happening, right? And so just kind of helping them identify for themselves authentically, how would they feel comfortable saying no? And role playing and helping them kind of talk through that, rather with parents, GALs or clinicians, can be helpful in helping them to feel more successful. And when we are talking about it and even having them visualize it, it lights up pathways in the brain to make it even more likely that they'll be able to access that behavior and new skill. And then Michael's asking, do I typically give your clients a mental health exam to check for co-occurring disorders? Yes, and this also the symptom measure that we use a DSM-5 symptom measure. It clusters symptomology and we ask about co-occurring disorder and substance use in our initial intake. So it's definitely important to ask the question, because if you don't ask it, you won't know until you kind of get rolling down the line, especially with youth. And so when we're thinking about youth and how I engage with youth, I ask them in open-ended ways, right? In a way that does not stigmatize or make it seem like they're going to get in trouble. So instead of saying, do you use, I'll say, when do you use drugs? What drugs do you use, right? So that way it feels less likely for them to say yes or no, or like they're going to get in trouble, right? And so I'm also very particular about the way I'm phrasing the questions to the youth so that they are feeling more comfortable in answering those questions. So that's a great question, Michael. The fourth area of youth prevention is to build self-efficacy and self-esteem skills, thinking back to the emotional and social developmental stage and identity that these youth are working on. When we help them feel confident in their ability to say no, confident in their ability to manage emotions, confident in their ability to do certain things, it assist in their ability to feel confident in refusing skills, right? Assist in their ability to navigate and mitigate some of those risk factors we'll talk about in just a moment. So self-efficacy is about the youth's ability, their perception of their ability, whereas self-esteem is about their perception of themselves, right? Rather or not they like themselves or not, rather or not they see their value. A little bit of a nuance there. So when we look at evidence-based prevention interventions, there are different levels to the way that we can intervene and prevent, and we're going to look at different levels, especially because there are multiple different ways in which you are all supporting youth, right? So the individual level is going to be helpful to help promote emotional regulation and resilience skills, whereas the family interventions are enhancing the parenting practices and family cohesion. And this will make more sense as we look at the risk and protective factors for each one of these levels in just a moment. Community engagement is going to help increase their access to positive mentors and safe activities, right? Do they have safe, developmentally appropriate activities to explore and to get those developmental tasks of exploration and fun and rewards, right, met, right? Because if they don't, just like a toddler, they'll go getting into everything, and they're more likely to get into things, especially given now that our youth have so much access to so much information with these devices and social media. We have school-based programs. This is where creating a supportive school climate and fostering connectedness is going to be very, very important, right? So if you ask the youth like how they feel, what their connection is with their teacher, who's their favorite teacher, what do they like about their teachers, that can kind of help you to begin to recognize and understand better if there is a connectedness to their school, if they feel safe and supported in school. And so what we'll soon see here is that addressing risk and bolstering protective factors across these different domains are going to enhance our prevention efforts. And so we're really using that science, the brain science, as a hack to help prevent the substance use disorder from happening. And so with individual protective factors includes high self-efficacy, right? Where they have that strong confidence in their ability to resist peer pressure and are less likely to engage in substance use. Their emotional regulation skills are their ability to cope with, strong, intense emotions across the board. It's going to help to reduce their reliance on substances for mood regulation. And when we're thinking about emotional regulation, we also want to think about excitement and not only those vulnerable or quote unquote negative emotions like anger and sadness, right? Because sometimes if they're feeling like, oh my, like I'm just all over the place, I can't concentrate, and that's getting them in a lot of trouble, they may find themselves using certain drugs like Adderall and things of that nature to kind of try to mitigate that, because they don't have the skills to help calm their bodies down and regulate. Risk factors look like mental health challenges. So are we seeing depression, anxiety or conduct orders, right? Because these are strongly correlated with increased substance use. Are we seeing impulsivity and sensation seeking? Because high impulsivity and a preference for new, exciting experiences do predict an earlier initiation and ongoing use. Again, remembering that impulsivity and sensation seeking is a part of adolescence, but are we seeing heightened levels of impulsivity and sensation seeking? A history of trauma or adverse childhood experiences, essentially overwhelming stress, can significantly elevate the risk of substance use as a maladaptive coping strategy. And then we're looking at their perception. What do they believe about their peers' use and the harm of using, right? Are they thinking that, nothing's going to happen if I use? Are they thinking that everybody's using? Because when they have that perception, they may be more likely to engage in substance use. And so we'll talk a little bit more around how to address use perceptions and how to give them information in a way that's contrary to how we were taught to give them information, right? As opposed to giving them information in a way that's supposed to be like a scare tactic or to deter them from doing things. We can introduce the information in a way that uses the brain science of their motivation around wanting to do what most of their peers are doing, right? So we focus on what most of their peers are doing as opposed to the consequences of doing these things. Family protective factors include positive parenting practices, right? So you want to explore what the relationship is like with their parent. If you have opportunity to engage with their parent, and I highly, highly recommend that you do. As for those GALs, for those who are in case management, etc., if you are unable to engage the parents, you might just ask questions like, what is your relationship like with your parent? How would you describe your relationship with your parent? When do you go to your parent and talk with them about important things, right? To kind of get an understanding whether or not there's warmth and support in that aspect of things. And then also thinking about what are consequences for things, what are their family rules, having family rules, having consequences and consistency, having clear expectations around use and non-use is also going to be very important. And another protective factors that we'll talk a little bit more about as risk factors. We have open communication. Do they feel that their families are able to discuss substance use openly and the risk openly? Is this a conversation that they're having as a family unit? Can they talk to their parents about these things, their big brothers, their big sisters, right? Their aunts, their uncles, whomever is in their family system? Are they having open communication about this? And then family cohesion. Are there strong family bonds, right? Because this is another protective factor. Even though you are like, oh, I don't want anything to do with my parents, they absolutely do. They want to be close with their parents. They want the acceptance from their parents, right? It just looks a little bit different than it did when they were being parented as young children or toddlers. So strong family bonds is going to be extremely important. What do you guys do as a family, right? What do you guys do to have fun, right? What's your favorite memory with your family? That can kind of, those are some type of questions that can kind of help you begin to understand what their family system is like. So over here in the chat box, it says, does this work with teens who have been using a long time and who have no adult family members? Yes. So this is where we're going to think about how to create a support system for them, right? How to get them involved in mentorship programs or coaches with coaches can be a healthy, strong force, or a healthy relationships with any adult, honestly, can be very, very helpful and a very significant protective factor. And so for youth who do not have adult family members, we want to think about how can we connect them with adults that see them, that want to pour into them, and that want to love on them, right? It only takes one person to, one adult more specifically, to really motivate a child. Does that make sense? Elizabeth says, what about the family system who does not view substance use as something negative, or families that engage in substances? Yes. So when we go to our risk factors, we'll see that when families are actually promoting that, right, and they're using substances, the youth are more likely to want to do that or model these behaviors because youth basically repeat what they see, right? Even on a subconscious level, they are more likely to engage in things that they're witnessing their family use. So many of the times when I've seen youth who haven't had younger engagement or initiation in use, it is because family members may have introduced it to them, or they're watching family members engage in use at very young ages, so this becomes more of a norm. And so in those cases, clinical recommendations, right? So in those cases, we want to think about peer support and how we can help them understand what is actually going on with most of their peers. We can use open-ended questions to get them to begin thinking about what might be some of the consequences and how that aligns with or impacts their decision making, their values, and things of that nature. We're going to want to make sure that they have the ability to regulate their emotions. We want to make sure they have emotional literacy to be able to recognize what they're feeling and why they're feeling it. We want to make sure, so we're going to basically build on other protective factors, right? And build the sense of community for them as well. Does that make sense? So essentially what we're thinking about is how do we take these protective factors and foster them and build on them and cultivate them and nurture them so that the child has enough buffers in place to mitigate the risk factors. These are great questions. I love it. All right, next question from Ursula. It says, we have clients that make progress with us, but then they return a family unit that does not have positive parenting practices, and it makes it so hard for the client, which is sad, for sure. And this is why I say it is so important that we engage the family members, right? We need to help the parents and the family members also understand their child. So it takes a moment of sitting back and building rapport with the parent to find out what their goals are and what their values are, and to help them understand their child and to help them understand how they can support their child, right? Because even though they may not have positive parenting practices, it's more than likely not because they don't want them, but because they don't know they exist or they don't know how to do it, right? Or it hasn't been modeled. And so we can think about how, especially we're thinking about GALs and we're thinking about case management, how can we connect them with things that are going to help with that? And then I also have at the end here with some practical strategies, ways we can begin cultivating healthy family interactions, right? Whether that be in therapeutic space, in school settings, etc. So that's a really great question. It says, have you had success engaging families in treatments, families who maybe did not use substances as an issue? And how did you successfully engage or integrate them into treatment? Yes, I've had, yes, definitely had successful. What I do is first get the youth buy-in, right? Because they have to sign an informed consent. So initially what I say to them is something like, hey, you parents, adults generally don't understand youth a lot. So my job is to kind of help your parents understand you a little better. And what I talk to them about is just going to be helping how they can help understand you, not about the details that you and I are talking about. And I'm going to share with you everything that I share with them, right? So I'm very transparent and open around what we're sharing when we're sharing things, right? So that there's a rapport and trust and transparency with the youth. And then once they give you the permission, then I'll engage the parent. In the initial intake session, I generally see the parent and the youth. After talking to the youth, I'll have the parent come in and have some questions with them, get their perspective on their child, right? Get their perspective on what the issue is, get their understanding of what their what's that called? Their different discipline strategies are, so you can kind of understand what support they may need, right? Are there case management needs that they have that's contributing to a lack of connection and things of that nature? So yes, I do think it's very, very important. Those who have had the most best outcomes are those who have families involved in their treatment process. If they do not have families involved in their treatment process, getting them connected to other safe adults is very, very important. Family conflict is another risk factor. So when families have high levels of stress or conflict or inconsistent discipline, we may see an increase in use with our teens, and neglect or lack of supervision. So if a parent is not monitoring that or not offering emotional support, this can increase their vulnerability to specific peer influences and experimentation. And so it's important that when we're thinking about these different levels and we're trying to engage parents, we're doing so from a non-judgmental place, right? Because if the parent is feeling judged about their inability to give their child emotional support or the conflict that's happening in their family, it makes it very difficult for them to receive the feedback that you're providing to them. So you're literally building rapport with the parents, just like you are building rapport with the youth, so that you're able to help the parent get their needs met. Maybe they need some mental health services, maybe they need some parenting classes to help get them some additional strategies under their tool belt to help navigate. Maybe they just need some psychoeducation to help them understand why their child is responding the way they're responding. They might just need some psychoeducation to help shift their perspective from my child is being disrespectful to my child is learning how to communicate, right? And how you can then help them, guide them in their response to the way that they're engaging. And if they are experiencing a lack of supervision and neglect, kind of understanding what's contributing to that. Are they having to work 2-3 jobs? Are they on drugs themselves? Are they preoccupied? We want to be a little bit of sensitive and inquisitive about what's going on contributing to these risk factors so we can also help get those needs met. And by meeting those needs and addressing those challenges, we're able to then help the entire family system, which ultimately helps the child, right? The child is a product of their environment. School protective factors include positive school climates, right, where environments feel supportive, where there's a strong teacher-student relationship that promotes healthy behaviors. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard students tell me really sad things that teachers have said to them, like they're never going to be anything, like well, I don't know why they're even trying. And that's really discouraging, right? That's not a positive school climate. So those open-ended questions are going to be important to help understand what their relationships are like with their teacher, right? And again, one healthy adult relationship is our main goal. If you can get more, excellent. But if we can connect them with one positive, healthy adult, right? Rather that be in their family, at school, or in the community, if they're involved in church or religious a mosque or whatever systems that they might find themselves navigating, being intentional about understanding what is in their ecosystem, right? Or what's their eco map looks like. And then we have the extracurricular activities. So participation in sports, arts, clubs helps reduce time for risky behaviors. It builds resilience. It builds healthy community, social peer relationships. It helps build self-efficacy. It helps build self-esteem, which are all protective factors, right? And which are all contributing to healthy adolescent development. Substance use education programs have also been found to be helpful, specifically ones that teach life skills, right? Are been found to help reduce early initiation. And those life skills are looking like, the social skills, the regulation skills, the conflict management skills, the refusal skills, sort of things. And are on the opposite end, right? The flip here with the risk factors, academic struggles. So if they have academic poor performance or school disengagement, there may be an increase for substance use risk. Peer substance use also increases the exposure and likelihood that they may engage in use, as well as the school climate. So when the teachers and students are not engaged, or there's low discipline or consistency in how they're rolling out discipline, or there's limited extracurricular opportunities, there's too much idle time, and their brain development is seeking out experiences that are rewarding, seeking out experiences that are helping them build their efficacy and their confidence, the same way they did when they were toddlers. Like literally, it's another toddlerhood happening. We just got to be a little more strategic because they can do a lot more than they could as toddlers. And then we have community protective factors. These are going to look like when they are involved in community activities, right? Volunteer work. So maybe they're like animals, you get them involved in volunteering at a shelter, right? Maybe they are really social justice oriented or really being impacted by the negative things happening in humanity. You might get them involved in volunteering at a church or a homeless shelter or something to that effect. Community activities, you might get them involved in their park district or in other community programs that may be available. There's a lot of like expressive art programs. There's a lot of martial art programs. There's a wide range of programming for youth that we may be able to get them involved in. And that reduces the time for them to be able to go engage in use, but it also, more importantly, helps to develop and foster all of those adolescent tasks that they're working on. Again, with that emotional regulation, the efficacy, the self-esteem, conflict management, and more than likely they'll have a healthy relationship with their coach or have like a natural mentor in the process of engaging in these activities. Mentorship programs, or essentially those positive adult mentors within a community, can also help reduce likelihood. So you might just ask, like, is there a neighbor that you trust? Like, what adult do you trust in your life? Like, if you had to call an adult, who would you call, right? Again, asking some questions to have an understanding of whether or not there is a person that you can help to establish a healthier bond with and build on that bond with that child and that adult. Cultural and religious support is also important. So like involvement in faith-based or culturally affirming activities help fosters resilience and pro-social activities. And so we're thinking about things like participating in the events at their faith-based organizations. And then we're also thinking about when they have a strong ethnic or cultural identity, that also is a wonderful protective factor, because when we think about the developmental task of identity development in adolescence, if they know who they are and there's not a whole bunch of shame around the intersection of identities that they have, then they are more likely to feel confident and feel comfortable saying no to things that they don't really want to engage in. Community risk factors include neighborhood disadvantages like poverty, crime, and limited access to resources to increase substance use risk, substance availability. So that we got all these dispensaries popping up around. There might be what are the things called? The smoke shops. They have a lot of availabilities for a lot of things in those, unfortunately, alcohol, liquor stores and things like that. Do they have older cousins or older peers that are willing to buy these things for them, such as alcohol, tobacco, and other substances, right? So understanding their availability for like where would you get drugs if you wanted to use them might be a question that you ask to kind of just see, do they have availability to the drugs or not? So when we think about the social norms, right, and we're thinking about how we can use the super significant impact of peer influence to our advantage as adults, right? So the social norms theory is an evidence-based approach that is based on the concept that sharing healthy truths can help reduce student use of substances. And we found that regardless of their level of use, right, whether that be experimentation or abuse, using this approach has seen a reduction in teen use. So there's two components. One is finding real information or norms that are relevant to the youth you're working with. And then secondly, correcting the false normative beliefs, right? So oftentimes they may think like, oh man, everybody's using, but finding the literature that supports that, no, everybody's not using. So when you think about the statistics that I shared with you earlier today, they were presented using a social norms theory, right? Where it's like, oh, majority of youth are making good decisions. Oh, only 30% of youth are actually using, right? So when we're showing, we're basically flipping the inverse. So as opposed to this idea that by telling them that, this is gonna just ruin your life, that is less effective than telling them about how their peers are actually navigating these things. Jenna says that Smoke mobile van shops sell many things all over the state of Florida. Oh, got mobile vans too nowadays? Wow. Yeah, we're in a new era for sure. And so it just makes it where we want to be very intentional about cultivating these protective factors early on and throughout life, right? Especially in adolescence, so that we are able to help give them the skills that they need to mitigate and navigate all of the things that can contribute to substance use as well as substance abuse. So let's take some practice, guys. We're going to look at how we do this. And then on the next slide, I have some statistics. And we're going to talk about how do we flip the statistic so that we can actually use the social norms theory. Okay, so we're going to flip the data to represent the trend in the opposite direction. Oftentimes, trends are saying 30% of youth use and 1 in 5 this, right? So we're going to flip it, right, on its head so that we're showing what most youth do in the positive direction. Does that make sense to everyone? The second thing you need to do is make sure you're locating information on behaviors and decisions that represent the youth that you're working with. Everybody's working with different demographics of youth across the state of Florida. And so you want to make sure that the youth that in the statistics you're using are relatable, right? So let's say, for instance, consider, are they athletes? Are they musicians? Are they artists? Are they, what is their cultural background? What is their linguistic background? So just kind of being thoughtful around what are the demographics and the things that are relevant to that youth. And that is the information we want to go and find, okay? Yeah, like we're using brain science for reinforcement, right? This is positive reinforcement. So let's take some practice, right? The first statistic is by the time youth reach 12th grade, 46.6% of teens have tried illicit drugs. How would we flip that on its head using this social norms theory? 100% minus that 46.6 is going to tell us how many you have not tried, right? Over 50% haven't tried, right? 54% have not used. 53.4% have not, right? So you see, oh, most of my peers actually don't use, remembering that they are really, really impacted by perception of what their peers are doing, right? So second statistic, in most states, nearly 12% of youth use drugs. How would we flip that and present that to youth? Love, positive community norms, spontaneous institute, so powerful. 54% have not used, 88% of you don't use drugs. 78% of you do not use drugs, and most 78 youths have not used, right? So wow, it's like, oh, really? I had no idea, especially because media and consumption causes an overgeneralization to believe that this is actually happening. So we're breaking the myth down, right? 2.08 million or 8.33% of 12 to 17-year-olds nationwide report using drugs in the last month. Over 88% of children have not used drugs. What? Like, is anybody mind blown, right? We're in this field thinking like, oh my goodness, our babies are like, oh, what are they doing, right? But when we think about the statistics, we're seeing that your efforts and everything you're doing is impactful. It's shifting things. So it's kind of encouraging, right? When we think about it for us as adults, but then even more so for the youth, where it's like, oh, okay, so I'm not a lame if I don't use, because majority of people don't. All right. So we're going to go into talking about engagement. Can you guys drop in the chat box? What are some of the challenges that you've had with engaging teens? In substance use, and I'm going to let you guys chat in there, but I'm just going to kind of like narrate a little bit. In substance use, majority of the time, very seldom do we have youth coming in saying, I want to be here because I think I have a problem, right? It's generally school, courts, or their parents sending them in, right? Okay, so the challenges we have include, let me roll up a little bit here, finding their interest, being avoidant, when they're resistant, sharing information. They don't want to talk that, yeah, no, maybe, oh no. They just don't care. Meeting them on their level. The youth are defensive immediately. Keeping their sessions with me, I get ghosted a lot, probation, unsupportive family or poor role models, students that I would tell their parents, think they'll tell your parents everything. Yes. Okay, perfect. So we're going to look at what are some ways that we can use some motivational interviewing, which is one of the leading evidence-based practices within substance use treatment, right? It's also been found to be very effective with youth. And it's very important, let me go back a little bit, because it uses a non-judgmental approach. And more often than not, they don't want to engage because they feel like we're judging them. We don't understand them. It's not going to matter if they say anything. You think what you think already, right? It also helps to create a safe space for the teen to be vulnerable and feel heard and understood. I bet you that most of you can think about a time where the youth said it won't matter or they don't care, right? As you talked about, like, well, why don't you talk to your parents about it? Or what would happen if you told them, right? And so feeling heard and understood is one of the most important pieces of human connection. And so the youth have to feel heard and understood before they're going to give us information, before they're going to engage in conversations, before they're going to be receptive to the skills that we're teaching them, right? And then, or even thinking about that there is a problem, right? So 4 aspects includes absolute worth, recognizing that they inherently have worth, right? That they have autonomy, they can choose what they want for their lives, right? You know, within developmental context, but at the end of the day, even as adults, we can't force them to do anything, right? We can't force them to make the decisions we want them to take. So they have autonomy. Affirmation, we're being affirming, right, of their values, of their intentions, of their efforts, of their progress, of their interests, of their strengths, of their personality traits, right? And we're also using empathy, right? So we're connecting with them. Yeah, and unfortunately, oftentimes it is a punishment when they come see us 9 times out of 10, right? But that's where these ORs are really helpful to help break down that barrier, right? And even just naming what you know that may be coming up. You know what, some teenagers like don't want to be here because they feel X, Y, and Z. What are you feeling, right? So sometimes just naming it and putting it out on the table creates some safety in order for them to feel comfortable expressing themselves, right? Other times youth, like, they don't want to be disrespectful, right? So they may not really engage or say very much because they don't feel like everything they have to say may not be received well or may have been invalidated. So so we're going to look at ORS, right, which is an acronym used in motivational interviewing, where we're looking at open-ended questions, reflections, affirmations, and summaries. I'm going to review them. We'll watch a quick video of it happening, and then we'll spend some time as a group coming up, excuse me, with different open-ended questions, reflections, and affirmations using a case study. So you all should have received the link of the case study. I can drop it in the box if the team doesn't have it or if you have not received it. But open-ended questions are questions that allow the adult to guide the adolescent's reflections, right, on their situation, their options, and their consequences. So what I always tell people is that when we're talking with youth, and think about the advice you want to give them, frame it as a question to get them to think about it so they can begin creating the neural pathways in their own brains, right? So if I want to say that that's going to ruin your life, you might ask a question like, well, how is that going to impact you getting into school? How is that going to, what would happen if you had to do a drug test before getting a job, right? So it begins to get them thinking about it and coming to their own conclusions, right? Which also alleviates that idea of like they don't want to be taught that, and allows you an opportunity then to offer more information where you can then, after you get their feedback, you're able to then provide them with additional feedback because they feel listened to and heard as opposed to just being talked at. Excuse me. Open-ended questions also allow for the correction of that writing reflex, right? Especially when we're dealing with our babies or the youth. We have an urge as adults to like give them advice and like help them not make the mistakes we made or help them not ruin their lives, right? Especially if we see them walking down the wrong road. But we have to kind of take a step back and think again, how can I change what I want to say into a question so that we can begin helping them begin connecting their emotional limbic brain to their executive functioning, right? So we're helping them create emotion or neural pathways so that when they're out in the world, they can begin thinking about these things as opposed to just hearing or dismissing what an adult just told them. Reflections, affirmations, and summaries just indicate to the adolescent that they are heard and understood, right? That they feel seen, they feel heard. Because if they don't feel seen or feel heard, they're very, very unlikely to engage with you, to give you information, or to even listen or show up to their appointments, right? And that's where kind of that ghosting comes from. Real briefly, in the chat box, it says weight needs to be thoroughly given to wide variances in cultural and social norms that occur in different states. Base Florida behavior is vastly different than Connecticut, for example, Virginia, etc. And I also have having been licensed in each state for years. In general, my experience is most practitioners lack cultural competency and awareness of models or modes of life other than their own. And this is where that open-ended questions comes. Like we can learn a lot from these children. I mean, honestly, they will almost floor you with the way that they're thinking and their perspective taking and their ability to and even their consideration of the things that adults have been saying to them. So these open-ended questions can really be helpful in building cultural competence and understanding who the child is and what's important to them, right? And helping to correct that reflex. So we also have to be open-minded, right, to hearing and learning from the youth, just as we're asking them to be open to learning from ourselves. It's a great point, Alice. Scott. All right, so let's look at this quick video and see it in action, and then we'll take some time to practice with a case study before we close out.
Well, I'm here because my mom wants me to be here. Mm-hmm. I don't really want to be here, but got it. Whatever. She found my stash, and she freaked out. And she's going crazy over it. I don't know why she was going through my stuff in the first place, but whatever. Yeah. So now I'm here. Mm-hmm. I've been hanging out with a new cool crowd of people that I really like. Mm-hmm. And that's basically it. Yeah. So you've got this new group of friends, and you actually kind of like where you're at with things right now. And your mom was going through your stuff and found your stash, and it's just turned into, all of this. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And sounds like you're pretty upset with your mom for doing that. I am. Yeah. I mean, it's my stuff. I don't know why she's right. It's like your private place, and it's. I don't go through her. I don't go through her. I don't go through her stuff. I don't go through her purse. I don't. Yeah. So why should she go through yours? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I begin engaging with the client from a position of transparency and partnership. I emphasize the importance of Robert's version of the story, which is a fairly common story for teens. The nosy parent going through their adolescent child's room, finding something that causes a series of consequences ranging from lectures, punishments, and often a referral to a therapist. It can be easy to fall into the trap of rationalizing the parent's position and encouraging the teen to take responsibility for his actions. This would be counterproductive to the engagement process of MI. These early reflections serve to express an empathic understanding of the client's experience.
He introduced me to it too, so I've tried it.
So at his encouragement, you tried some drugs.
Oxy.
You tried Oxy. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And he encouraged you to do that.
Well, yeah, he said it was a pain medicine.
He said it would help you with some of the pain that you've been having.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it has, but I don't do it as often. It's just sometimes.
Okay, so you trusted him on that and you tried it out and you found that it helped you in certain ways. What are some of the things that you said it's takes some of the pain away? It's not
just dealing with my grandma's loss.
So that's helped you.
I feel alone. And I miss her, and it does help, but
so
I don't want to have to rely on having to take that.
Okay, so it's not something you want to rely on. You don't see yourself continuing to use this. It's something that you've found, at least for the moment, very helpful.
Yeah.
But it's not something that you want to make a habit or become reliant on or dependent.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And so that's a lot going on right now for you.
Yeah. It is.
You've been managing in the best way you can. You also have some doubts about it too. Sounds
like. Yeah, well, I don't really know too much about it other than it makes me feel good.
Okay, so for now, you know that it makes you feel good.
As the client isn't quite ready to express more about her concerns just yet, the counselor is careful to acknowledge the client's perspective about the comfort of the status quo. Allie's use of the phrase, "for now," leaves an opening for the client to change her perspective going forward. The counselor avoids the writing reflex, that is telling Abby what she should do, and instead conveys empathy and maintains engagement. She keeps the focus on the client's concerns so they can explore together how they might move ahead in their work.
All right, so change talk. When we're talking about the things we want to focus on reflecting, right, is their perspective. We want to focus on reflecting their reasons for change, the things that are important to them, the underlying emotions we heard them say. Those are some important things to help reflect and focus on as we think about things. With this open-ended question format, there's a technique called elicit, provoke, elicit technique. And this is where you are basically sandwiching the questions with the feedback and then giving an opening space for the youth to be able to give their understanding and their perspective. So with this technique, you're going to ask them about their thoughts, right? Before you even give them any information. And then following what they say, you will then inquire about those thoughts on the information provided. So for instance, they ask the question, what was happening with what's been going on with everything you have? What's been going on that's causing you to use let's just say marijuana, that's making you use marijuana. They may give some information about why they're using it and when they're using it. And then after they give that information, you might want to add in a question to, can I share some information? You give the information, and then after you give the information, you then want to ask them what their thoughts are, right? This gives them the opportunity to practice their autonomy, right? To acknowledge that they have knowledge and that they have something to say, that their perspectives matter. Also to provide any corrections that may need to be provided, and as well as giving them the opportunity to be more likely to receive your feedback because they don't think you're talking at them, right? It also gives them the space for you to give them further information about what's happening and to understand more why they're doing and thinking what they're thinking, right? And it also gives you an opportunity, it gives you opportunity to help understand what is important to them. What are their values, right? So that when you're talking with them and you're helping them begin thinking about things and guiding their analysis of the trajectory they're taking, you're able to help connect dots with their values and how their substance use may impact their goals, may impact and align or misalign with what's important to them. This makes sense to everyone? Lori said that reflection seems good, except that some of it sounded like parroting. And it does, there is a little bit of parroting happening, and that is to show that you're listening to them and that you got what they were saying. And so there is an intentionality behind using some of their words, but you can also paraphrase, right? And in that way, it helps them recognize that they are being heard. And more often than not, when you reflect back to a person what they just said, they will begin to elaborate. And this is especially helpful for that challenge of youth who don't want to talk, right? So when they're saying, yeah, you know, I'm feeling this way about my mom, like she's always breathing down my neck. You're like, oh, wow. So you feel like your mom doesn't get you. They're going to say more as opposed to, well, do you think your mom's just overwhelmed? Do you think your mom's just trying to, you know, giving a different perspective? That makes sense. And so the reflection gives an opportunity for you to gather more information, for you to build that safety and rapport, and for them to be more open to receiving the information that you're giving them. Even think about like when you're having conversations with people, right? Your supportive one. They reflect like, man, that makes sense, or they're acknowledging what you just said. And that helps you to elaborate more and to speak more on things. So what we're going to do now to close out is do a little bit of practicing of identifying open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. So you all have a document that gives you a lot more information. It's just been dropped in the chat box around the scenario. I'm going to do a brief highlight level overview, but in your document, it talks about their school environment and some of those protective and risk factors, such as the family, the community, etc. Alice says that tone is vitally important in the manner a clinician presents, gives information, and solicits. Definitely, definitely. And nonverbal communication is very, very important in all communication, especially with our teens. And also considering our confidence level in communicating with them as well, because if they don't see us being authentic adults, then they are also less likely to engage with us. So let's take a peek here because we are coming up on time. So our youth is called Alex. They came to you struggling with grades, frequent arguments with family, and disciplinary issues at school. Some of the behavioral challenges is hanging out with peers who might use substances and occasionally smells like smoke at school. Emotionally, they're feeling misunderstood by adults, frustrated about being quote unquote judged, and don't see why academic performance even matters. So your role is that Alex just arrived in your office appearing defensive and uninterested. Our goal is to engage Alex in a meaningful conversation, practicing the ORS approach. The focus is on building rapport and gently exploring their feelings, goals, and potential motivations for change. So in our chat box, we're going to do this together. Let's identify an open-ended question to help assess our protective factors. Again, if you open up that document, it has some additional information about what's going on. It's going to take you, it's like a button you have to connect. But I think, what are some open-ended questions that we can ask that help think about some of the protective factors that are happening? In your document, there's some protective factors in school, social, family, and community. Risk and protective factors being listed. So let's just come up with maybe one or two questions, and then we'll kind of just go down. Who do you go to when you need help? Excellent. Who are the people most important to you? Perfect. We're going to go on to the next one in interest of time. Let's think about follow-up questions based on his background. Is there anyone you talk to about this? That is a yes or no question, Angela. So what you want to do is make it into a who, what, where, why, or how, right? So how do you choose who to talk to about things? When do you talk to that important person would be a way to kind of help frame it into an open-ended question. Aaliyah says, do you have anyone you trust that you can talk to about how you're feeling? So we just change it into who do you talk to? Who can you trust, right? Or who do you talk to when you are feeling overwhelmed, right? What things are important to you? Who are your supports? What brought you here today? Have you ever felt this way before? That's a yes or no question again. So what we want to do is think about how to frame it. What other time did you feel like this? Sounds like you've been really overwhelmed. Excuse me. All right, great questions, guys. Let's move on to reflections. What are some reflections we can say to Alex, right? They're feeling judged, they don't understand why school matters. What are some reflections we can offer? So think about those summaries and paraphrasing. And obviously your mind will do a little bit of coloring in the dots here based off of your work. Sounds like you're feeling misunderstood. School seems to be a drag right now. Excellent. It sounds like you're feeling misunderstood by the adults in your life. And then more than likely, I'm like, yeah, because X, Y, and Z, right? And just keep going. Sounds like you do not enjoy school. So there's not a lot to do in your neighborhood. Well, I can see that this situation is really bothering you. It's difficult to have everyone else tell us what to do. Perfect, perfect. And then affirmations, right? How can we affirm their strengths? So looking at that document of their strengths, how can we affirm their strengths? Oh, okay. I don't know why my brain is thinking that we're done in 2 minutes. Okay, so let's slow down. Thank you for the reminder. Sounds like you don't feel your space is respected. So let's go back. Let's look at to stay with these reflections. Your feelings are valid. You're going through a lot and no one seems to be listening or understanding. What are you good at? Your friends are really important to you. You are aware of your health needs. Sounds like you feel no one is listening to you. You've been through a lot and you haven't given up and are still trying to figure things out. We're affirming their persistence. I love you are doing so well in our class. Tell me more about your creative side. Excellent. What do you like to do? Who you are comfortable in your social group. What kind of things do you enjoy doing? It seems that you are really investing energy and the situation does not improve. Can you think of alternatives to situations in your life going on now? Can you tell me at least 3? So I would frame it into an open-ended question. Can you, it's kind of open and yes or no type of thing. So what are some alternative ways or alternatives to the situation? So just kind of phrasing it into an open-ended question. I'm curious about, would you like to share with me as openers? How has your art class helped you with your creativity? Sounds like you may be uncomfortable in some of your experiences at school. Excellent. Excellent. So we're affirming their awareness of themselves. We're affirming their determination. We're affirming their, reflecting the impact of being at school and the discomfort that they're having, being misunderstood. We're affirming their creativity and their art skills and exploring it further. We also have here, how do you feel when you're not fitting into your peer group? Wonderful. Helping to establish and understand more around their emotional literacy and what comes up, and maybe even understanding what the triggers are to their use. Is there a fun youth group at your church? Building on that community and religious protective factor and kind of thinking about, okay, well, what are some things that you can get connected with in that realm? Tell me more about your childhood friend and how they support you. Asking more about that friend, how they support will also be helpful in understanding more around like dating, helping them to think about what type of peers they want to be around, what type of things they need to feel seen and feel heard, and being able to maybe even connect that to what the teachers or adults might need to do. Glad you have a friend to support you. Yes, 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 yes. These are excellent. These are excellent. Okay. What would you like to do for a living? Okay, so this is great, right? So again, what we're doing is we are taking all the information. We get a nice little stack of papers, right? Depending on which system we're working in. Or generally we get some general information from people. If you're able to get feedback from teachers and as well as their parents, that's very, very helpful to kind of get to a multi-systemic approach and understanding in addition to the child's perspective. So if it's all right with you guys, we're going to go ahead and move on to looking at what are some practical interventions or strategies you can do to begin building on the protective factors that we just talked about and mitigating those risk factors. So we're thinking about self-esteem, one of the most important and biggest challenges of adolescence is we can think about an opportunity to do, for instance, Alex is creative. So you might do a mirror image where you have an outline of a mirror and you ask them to draw a reflection of themselves. Or you might ask them to draw a reflection of who they want to be, or draw a reflection of the things you like best about yourself, right? And so the mirror image just allows them to be able to kind of create and draw out some of the things that they do enjoy about themselves, and being able to kind of have a better understanding of the different parts of them. Value sort is a technique or a strategy used from motivational interviewing. You can find it online. there's a stack of like 200 different values and definitions. And there are 3 columns that you have the youth divided into. So what's really nice is you can cut them out and have them move things if you're in person, which is really cool because that movement, rather through the art or through the shuffling of the cards, is really helpful in regulation due to the large muscle groups being activated and sending some common signals. But this value sort also helps them understand what is important to them and why, which makes it easier for them to have better self-efficacy and better choices about their peer group and what they're doing, right? So, and it also gives you background around how you can then formulate your questions, right, in order to help them begin exploring what it is that or how it is that their use is impacting their values. So this value sort, you have them divided into 3 columns. The first column is very important to me. The second column is important to me. The third column is not important to me. And there are a number of values. There's values like purpose, values like attractiveness, values like health, values like authority, right? And then there's a definition, and you have them do it. So you generally have them do like maybe 10, 15 at a time. And then you have to take a step back and ask them questions like, how did you make a choice on which column it went into? Did anything surprise you? Do you want to change anything, right? You can kind of ask additional open-ended questions to begin to understand them a little bit more. Extracurricular activities, we talked a lot about this, kind of self-explanatory, but when they're engaging in things that they feel good about and that they're able to excel at and feel a sense of community around, especially when we think about those team sports, is very, very helpful in helping them build their self-esteem and understanding that they're worth and that they are capable of things, right? Affirming characteristics, values, and efforts, right? So we thought about Alex a second ago. We affirmed that they were artistic, right? We affirmed that they really valued their friends and supportive friends. We affirmed that they wanted to be heard. We affirmed that they were being persistent and disciplined in their attempts to continue pushing forward, right? We also want to affirm their efforts. All too often, youth and even adults, right, we're focused on outcomes. And we forget to kind of celebrate those wins and those milestones. And so it's wonderful to teach them and the youth how to begin to acknowledge their efforts, right? Like, you tried really hard. You worked hard to study on that test, and it was really disappointing that you still got a D, right? So kind of just, but affirming that you're working at it, even affirming like, you don't want to be here, but you come every week. Like, that's determination, right? Also some other ways that you might affirm what is happening and what is going on. So affirming does not mean that we maybe even necessarily agree with it or find or have it as something that we think is amazing, but instead just acknowledging the uniqueness of the individual sitting across from us. Remember, if you recall, autonomy, right, that absolute worth that we looked at in the motivational interviewing spirit, we're validating the absolute worth that they have as unique individuals, right? And then role playing can really be helpful, especially as we think about those refusal skills where they're able to practice making an exit plan, right? So how can you use, but they're always looking at their phones. So, okay, pretend you just got a text message from mom saying you got to come home, or pretend you just got to, you just remembered that you have to go and get your little sister or something like that, right? So kind of helping them identify what feels like an appropriate reason for you to be able to exit stage left if they are not respecting your boundaries, or if you don't want to just flat out say no, right? Or maybe they might say something like, I have to do a family dinner when I get home. I can't smell like that or have my eyes all red. Right? Or my parents will notice, or I'll be around my grandparents later. So kind of just utilizing and thinking about, they can role play and practice that with you, you being a peer. Okay? So this is a couple of practical interventions we can use in the self-esteem realm. When we're thinking about interpersonal skills, right? Because it's also something that is significantly tied to our ability to have good self-esteem and have good relationships, right? Which is also another component of adolescent development. So helping them learn what assertive communication is. So there's a particular type of assertive communication called I statements. It's a 3-part statement. And so you break down the statement to them. I, what you're feeling, how you're impacted, essentially. So I feel. What is causing you to feel that way? I feel misunderstood when my mom just ignores what it is that I just said, right? And then that third part is the request, right? Or what they need. I would really love it if they would just hear me, right? So I feel really misunderstood when you don't listen to me, mom. I would really like if you could just listen before responding. right? So helping them to kind of think about how to frame their assertive communication statements so they can begin not only communicating with their peers, but also being able to communicate and advocate for themselves with adults as well as emerging young people. Make sense to everyone? You may also even teach them about the other communication styles such as aggressiveness and passive aggressiveness and being passive, and kind of talk more with them about the consequences of these different styles, right? Like, how do you feel if a person says it this way, or even have them have a statement and think about it being said in each different style and the impact of that style, right? Is it going to land? Is it going to cause or mitigate the conflict, etc.? Conflict management styles. You can find YouTube videos on this too. There's handouts, worksheets. You can also find a lot of YouTube videos as well that you can use with the youth. So conflict management styles is going to think about how do we teach them the different ways that they can navigate conflict, especially given that they are very prone to wanting to what we call fawn, or just kind of surrender to what they perceive is going to keep the peace, or what they perceive is going to make them look cool. So we're kind of helping to normalize that conflict is a natural part of human relationships. It's never going to always be easy peasy, whether it's a romantic, platonic, or familiar relationship, or even a work relationship. So how do we use assertive communication and other different ways, like compromising, letting, just kind of giving over, letting the other person kind of have it because maybe it's not as important. And so there are a number of different conflict management styles that you can teach. Then it really depends on what theory you want to use, but you have a lot of different YouTube channels that you can kind of use. Again, helping them walk through when could this be helpful? Why would it be helpful? How would this impact this situation, right? So they can begin thinking about for themselves why this would be something that they might use, or how they could use it, and then even preparing for potential challenges that might come so that they already have a game plan for how they can navigate these things if they find themselves having challenge. The skill face activity is an activity that kind of helps them understand how important it is as humans to actually be present with each other, especially as we think about 2025. Everyone's always in their phones or in a device, right? Just walking and talk. Like, I was thinking about how youth will literally be in the same room on the phones, and then you ask why they're not communicating with each other. We're playing a game. So anyway, all that to say, right? Dealing with the context we're dealing with, this kind of begins to help them make sure that they don't lose out on the ability to have real live communication. And so the still face activity is where you will have, in general, this is something you can do with a group, or you might just kind of talk about what would happen, and also videos, right? And so you would have someone talking about something benign, like what they did for the day. And then you'll just sit there and just have a blank face throughout the entire time. And then kind of explore what was that like, right? Or even not even pay attention to them and just kind of be on their phone, versus when you're nodding your head and engaging and reflecting and kind of talking with them about the differences and how that made them feel when they were being attuned to and paid attention to, as opposed to kind of ignored and dismissed, right? That will happen when a person just has a flat face. Just typically a person feels like they don't want to keep talking, like the person's disinterested, etc. So not only does this help them understand empathy, right, and how we are engaging with people, but it also may be a way for them to begin to understand their triggers with rejection and their triggers with social anxiety, etc., if you're in a clinical aspect of things. The broken record technique is a technique that can be helpful for those refusal skills where they are just repeating themselves over and over again. I'm not interested. I can't do that. I'll get kicked off my team. No, I'll get kicked off my team. I get kicked off my team, right? Just helping them become comfortable constantly repeating their boundary, or repeating their boundary in moments where there might be peer pressure, right? Come on. I'm thinking about that movie Beethoven, with the big dog Beethoven. It's not called Beethoven. I can't think of the name, but that peer pressure scene is like popping up in my head right now. Anywho, exit plan strategies, right? We talked a little, I mentioned this a little earlier, but kind of helping them role play and think through, how are you going to get out of there if people or your peers begin to engage in activities that you don't want to engage in, right? What are the things that you can say that feel socially acceptable for you to be able to leave? Yeah, it is sad we have to teach them how to listen, unfortunately, how to have human connection. Yeah, the world is making it very difficult for humans to have connection, and there's just so much overwhelm happening that this is making it even more important that we teach them how to regulate, right? So that they can have the capacity to sit with not knowing what a person is thinking about them and all these other things that are kind of coming up. All right. So do these practical strategies make sense to everybody? Any questions? So we're going to go on over to family engagement. Family engagement is so important. They're children. Even though they're teens, they are children. Oh, my pleasure, Casey. Have a wonderful day. All right. So the practical, let's think about providing them opportunities to engage in fun and enjoyable activities together. So before I go through this list, one of the things I would do as a clinician and my earlier like sessions with parents is I have them sit across from each other and answer 4 questions, right? And then answer the question based off of what they think each other is going to say. So the questions would be like, what's their favorite memory, or what is something they do to take care of themselves? So really be 9 questions, and then they swap papers and they have to see that they get the answers right. So it also helps you have a better understanding of their attunement to to each other, their connection with each other as well. But some other things you might do might be a family game night, right? So maybe you talk with the parent about doing this, or maybe if you're in a school setting or case management or community setting, you might actually host a community family game night activity where the families can come and choose from a variety of different games and play together, right? So, or strength-based guided discussions where you're having them kind of like talk about things that they enjoy, like what was our favorite memory with each other, and what's the thing I like best about my mom or my child, vice versa, right? Family art night, family karaoke night, family movie night, family dyadic sessions where we're engaging in dialogue and you're helping them facilitate healthy conflict, right? Or even just engage in activities together that feel good and exciting. So we want to help to create opportunities that they can have fun together, especially if life is just so busy, it's difficult. And the only hour that mom may make time is in the therapy hour. Dad is able to make time in the therapy and the week, is in a therapy hour. This can be an opportunity to really cultivate some healthy, positive engagement, which is helpful in mitigating some of that conflict and the lack of attunement and support or warmth that they may be experiencing. We also want to encourage parents to have discussions with their teenagers. Parents who talk to their teens, who know what's going on with their teens, who are asking about their questions, like what was the best part of it, instead of just how was your day? You get that one answer question, oh good, right? Or one answer word, the one word answer. Help them identify some open-ended questions, such as what was the highlight of your day? Who made you laugh today? What was the silliest thing that happened today? What was the best part of your week, right? So kind of beginning to ask questions that go a little bit deeper so they can actually engage in discussions with their teens. All too often, because of just like the overwhelm of adulthood and parenthood, parents are only talking to their child when they're redirecting them, or when they are reprimanding them, or when they're disciplining them. So it's very important that we're also encouraging parents to have normal, benign, general conversations as well. We also want to encourage parents to affirm their child's strengths, their efforts, their values, their interests, and their talents, right? Parents are like, I want to make sure they're successful, but we also want to make sure that they have confidence and self-esteem as well, right? So helping parents, and this could be done like in case management in school settings. You might have like a little worksheet or a little handout that goes out to parents in your newsletter, right? With a couple of questions that you can say, hey, talk to your child about this, right? Yes, talking with versus talking to, exactly, Thomas. And engaging in fun activities. You might list out some different activities that are free that they can do at home, right? There's ways to like play Just Dance with YouTube, right? There's ways to, like, you don't have to have a whole bunch of resources in order to have fun and engage in different activities, especially as we think about the variance of populations that you all are working with. The question Alana has is, what if the team refuses to participate? Do you have any suggestions for that? Yes. Because when we think about trauma-informed care, agency is one of the very important aspects of things, right? And so in that moment, we give them room to refuse, right? So it's like, okay, you don't feel like paying right now. Why? Can I ask why? Right? You might ask them why, and sometimes they can give you an answer that can be resolved, right? Or you might be like, okay, that's cool. Is there something else you would like doing? Right? And so you might then join with them to collaborate around what types of things they may want to do. I actually had a teen who was very, very amazing, intellectual young lady, and very wonderful. I love working with her, but initially she would refuse to do any and everything. So we spent some time thinking, okay, so this is going to be fun. let's think about some different ways. So we then sat there and talked about, okay, so we could do this, and we could do this, and kind of get an idea around what they would be open to doing, right? And in that refusal to participate is an attempt to have some type of control over things, right? So thinking about it, like, what is the function behind the refusal? How do you join with them to collaboratively identify what to do instead? And how do we validate and affirm that they just may not want to engage or have the energy to, right? So those are 3 different angles you can take with a child or teen who's refusing to participate. Tracy says, with my own children, we did a high and low. What was your high for the day and the low? That open discussions for struggles and positives. More in-depth conversations by my boys, but more comfortable talking on car drives, less eye contact, and talk very openly. Love it, Tracy. Thank you for that anecdote of how these conversations are really simple to have and can be done in a normal routine, such as driving home. Lori says, take out a family photo book, just laugh and enjoy, looking at old hairstyles, clothing, etc. to reminisce. Yes, also a really amazing thing. And then like all these digital things we have going on, there's that app called Free Photo Books or something like that, where they can get photos from their phones printed out and maybe even create a scrapbook together, right? Maybe another really fun, simple activity that people can engage in. Or you can even have them just download different photos and they'll literally send a book to them. Jennifer says, high, low, buffalo. The buffalo is something random or funny, etc. I like that, Jennifer. Thanks for that. I'm going to use that. Pamela says, we have a family game called How Well Do You Know Your Family? Amazon, loads of fun. Thank you. Peek and Pit. What is that, Tina? Peek and Pit. These are cool. Keep them coming, right? We have a wealth of knowledge in the room, and sharing our success stories and games and activities can be very helpful, especially when we maybe don't have time to figure out what to do. It's like a high and low. Okay, awesome. Peek and Pit. Okay, I get it. A different way of framing high and low. Love it. Awesome. All right. Is it okay if I continue on? Now we're looking at regulation skills, right? Because the main impact and challenge of adolescent development is that limbic system working in conjunction with the executive functioning. So regulation is so important. And if you all are willing, I'd like to walk us through a couple of these so that we are able to kind of know how to facilitate it. There's also always YouTube videos you can use as well. You can even find scripts as well that you can utilize. Progressive muscle relaxation is a teen-friendly exercise that I found teens to find really helpful, especially for like when they have racing thoughts or having insomnia, PTSD, anxiety, and it's something they can inconspicuously also do in their chairs or in the stall of a bathroom. So if you all are willing to do this exercise with me, or we have 10 minutes. I don't even know how many more slides I have. Can't recall. I'm going to explain them and then we can go back and then we can engage in them experientially. So progressive muscle relaxation is when we are tensing muscles and releasing them. These regulation strategies are going to be helpful in tapping on what's called the ventral vagal nerve, which is the off switch to our stress response system, okay? And the ventral vagal nerve being turned on allows them to have what's called the rest and digest state, where they're able to be present and feel safe and have connection and intimacy. And so we would tense our foreheads by raising our eyebrows. We make a big smile to tense our jaws. We lift our shoulders to tense our shoulders. We ball our fists and make a muscle to tense our arms. We squeeze up off the chair like we're lifting off the chair to tense our hips, our abs, and our glutes. We then also ball our feet or our toes to increase or tense our feet. And we tense and then release. And that's progressive muscle relaxation, walking one muscle group at a time. Box breathing is when we are taking an inhale, pausing, exhaling, pausing for the same count. Typically, it's a count of 4 where you inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. With both of these skills, it's very important to normalize that thoughts popping up is normal, right? It's almost like an endurance training for cognitions and detaching for overwhelming thoughts. But it's also very important that we help make sure that we're breathing in our bellies and not in our chest, especially when we're thinking about overwhelming stress and substance use disorder, and how with youth is often connected to challenges with regulation and self-esteem. There may be some more chest breathing or holding of the breath. We want to make sure that breath is happening in our bellies. Creating a coping box is a pretty cool and artistic way to be able to build on a child's strength, where you might have a box that they decorate and kind of create and then put things inside, like pictures of things, their favorite memories or favorite people. It might have like a fidget in there. It might have like some good smell good lotion in there for some sensory tactile based coping. It might have like a little Sudoku book or crosswords puzzle, or it might have just whatever the youth actually enjoys, right? I'm gonna say Game Boy. Whatever the youth actually enjoys inside of the box. So based on what they find to be helpful, right? A fidget toy, a stress ball. There are so many, you can go to the dollar store and get a lot of this stuff. It might be like a little notebook to just doodle and draw, right? There are a number of different ways that, or things that can go into a coping box. And then exercise and movement is also helpful. Again, engaging the large muscle groups. I'm going to check the chat box real quickly. Alice Marie says that I've shot baskets with a 12-year-old boy housed in a horrible facility to get outside in my long dress and heels. He couldn't believe I would and could do it. Lighted the situational heaviness and connection. Yes. Kudos to you. I know that they're like, wow, they really, really appreciated that. I bet I can just imagine how amazed the child was and how important they felt, right? And then thanks a lot of the coping box. Yeah. So, and then would it be okay? I'm gonna read. Thomas says that as a musician and therapist, I've utilized music to connect with clients, especially adolescents and young adults. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And you can use music in such a number of different ways, by like following a melody or an instrument. You can use it in a way to like rewrite lyrics. You can use it in a way to help unpack different unhelpful beliefs and schemas. Like, it is just so many amazing ways to use music. Thanks, Thomas. And as a I was about to say music therapist, but and as a musician, that's pretty cool too, because I imagine you can kind of like play some of your instruments and kind of have them act out the emotion, right? Is one cool way as well. All right. So yes, all of these exercises can not only be used with teenagers, but also adults and children for sure. 100%. All right. Music to recovery. All right, everyone. Thomas has dropped a resource in the box for us. So if it's all right with everyone, let's take a moment to choose. Do we want to go through the progressive muscle relaxation or the box breathing as a group? Drop your preference in the box here. All right. So it sounds like box breathing. Okay. So it's just important to remember that when we're inhaling, we want to inhale through our nose if it's available to you. But more importantly, your belly should be rising with the inhale and falling with the exhale. We'll do just a quick 4 of these breaths, and then maybe we'll have some time to go through the muscle relaxation exercise, or at least a couple of the muscle groups. Okay. But it seems like the consensus is the box breathing. So if you want to get comfortable, you might begin by taking a deep breath, maybe noticing your body making contact with the surface, whether it's a chair, floor, bed. Maybe you offer your body movement or stillness, whatever it's asking for. And so you bring your attention to your breath. And we'll begin. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Taking a naturally paced breath, allowing any movement or stillness that your body is requesting. Thanking you all for your participation and your patience for those who chose to just observe. It's been an amazing, amazing time with you all. I have some resources for you as well in the chat box that are national and Florida based. And I'm going to turn it on over to Robert. Thank you all for your time and the amazing work that you're doing with the children you work with. Peace.
Thank you, Shantae, for that wonderful presentation. I see a lot of chats coming in, a lot of appreciation, especially for the exercises. So I want to thank you for the time and effort you put into this webinar and all the valuable information you've shared with us today. I have included Shantae's email on this slide. If you have any further questions about the topic of adolescent substance use and a trauma-informed approach, you may reach out to her. Please note a couple of business items before we conclude. I am dropping a few links in the chat. One of them is the survey. It's kind of sandwiched there in the middle, as well as the PowerPoint, the activity, and the videos that were shared. So click that link for the survey. I will drop just the survey here in just a moment. Additionally, when I end today's webinar here in just a second, your web browser will populate an image that looks like this. It says WebEx Meetings is trying to open a site on your computer. That is not spam, that is WebEx trying to redirect you to the evaluation, so click continue to be automatically redirected. Please sign into your account to complete the evaluation. If you do not have an account, if this is your first webinar with us, you can register for an account at no cost. You may do so by clicking haven't registered yet under the sign in menu. You must use the same email address you used when you registered for today's webinar when you set up your profile in FATA system. This is the only way to connect your attendance and your profile. For CEs to be reported to CE Broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. If you need to add or edit your license number, you may do so by logging in and clicking edit on the professional information section of your profile. You will get a third opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. As a reminder, the evaluation will close on Tuesday, March 4th, 2025 at the end of the day. For assistance with account login, account registration, or evaluation completion, fill out a contact us form on our website or email training@floridabha.org. We do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we verify your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be posted to the professional development section of your profile in your FATA account within 30 business days. You must have attended the entire webinar and completed the evaluation for a statement of credit. We are not permitted to provide partial credit. As a reminder, the recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. We'd also like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families for funding today's education. Have a great day, everyone, and I will post a couple more links in the chat for those of you who have not gotten them.